right, it is 10 a.m., so we're going to reward those of you that are here on time. Get started.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kathy Connolly with the Lair of the Golden Bear and the Cal Alumni Association. Welcome to our virtual Peet's coffee tasting this morning. Thanks for joining us. We're doing this from our house, and this is my husband, John Spevack, who works for Peet's. And we also have on Emily Bollinger, also of Peet's, and so the two of them are going to lead this coffee tasting. In addition, we have Caroline Connolly with us, and Callie Spevack, my daughter. So we're not wearing masks because we're all in our bubble. Yeah, so I'll take it, let John and Emily take it over.
Okay, welcome. This is very nice to have you all here this morning for a virtual coffee tasting. To those of you that just came in, we are recording this session, so if you don't want to be on camera for the recording, please just leave your camera off. You're all muted, but feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to ask questions as we go along. Don't need to wait to the end necessarily. I've been doing coffee tastings at the Lair for several years now. It started off with, first of all, you should probably say I'm a 25-year Lair of the Golden Bear camper. And for those of you who are here through the Alumni Association link and are not familiar with the Lair is the Alumni Association's family camp up in the Sierras in Pinecrest, California. That's been running family camp and other sessions since 1952, lairofthebear.org, 1949, lairofthebear.org, if you want to check it out. I've been camping through my wife for 25 years, and camp is really, really wonderful, but the coffee leaves a little bit to be desired. So many years ago, after I started working for Peet's, which is 14 years ago now, I started bringing my own coffee to the Lair, and we would plug in our press pots and plug in our electric kettles, bring our press pots, and brew coffee outside of our tent. And a couple of people wandered over, and we'd have coffee for them, and then a couple of more. And eventually it got to the point where it became a bit of a fourth week happening. We have a couple of photos to show you of what that looks like up in Pinecrest. So that's a typical morning out in front of my cabin at the Lair, and we brew a lot of coffee and invite folks over to try that. And there's another photo of coffee tasting. Roll through and show the aftermath of a full week when we taste a lot of different blends. We try and bring up coffees that maybe people haven't had before, and then we nail them up to the cabin when we're done for evidence. So you can see we try a lot of different things. And in more recent years, I've also started conducting coffee tastings for the Women's Wellness Week on a little bit of a more formal basis, where we actually do a comparative tasting of different kinds of coffee, and that's a photo from that. So that's a little bit of my Lair background and my Peet's background to give you an idea of why I'm conducting this. I also want to introduce my coworker at Peet's, Emily Bollinger, who's our green coffee manager. I work in our direct operations department, which is about as exciting as it sounds. So if you want to know transit times to Costco distribution centers, I'm your guy. But if you want to know something a little more exciting, like how we source and buy our coffee, Emily is better suited to answer those questions. So we're going to go to her for that. This morning, we're going to be tasting our 2020 holiday blend. This is a blend that we produce each year. It's a little bit different each year. It's always meant to be a full-bodied, and we'll get into what that means later, a full-bodied, real rich coffee that goes well in the cold weather in the wintertime. It's out now, and it's still about 85 degrees here, but we'll be having this coffee available right through about the end of the year when hopefully it'll be a little bit cooler, at least for most of us. So we'll be tasting that. If you have a holiday blend, terrific. If you have other coffee that you're tasting along with us, terrific. If it's not Peet's, that's all fine. A lot of great coffee out there. We're just going to talk about how to brew and taste coffee, and that would apply to pretty much any coffee. So I'd like to introduce Emily. Again, she's our green coffee manager. Green coffee is unroasted coffee. And we have a photo we'll bring up. But fortunately for us, green coffee is very stable. The clock really starts ticking on coffee. This you can see coffee right from the plant. You have the unripe cherry getting riper. That third one, the red, is a very ripe cherry that's ready to be picked, and then the fourth one is overripe, and then we have one more photo of what an actual green coffee bean looks like. So you can see that's the coffee bean or seed when it comes out of the cherry, and that's, once it's dried and put in a 50-pound burlap sack and shipped to us, that's what we refer to as green coffee. That's what Emily manages, and that you can store for quite a while. And once it's roasted is when you really want to get it out, packaged, shipped to the customers, and into your press pot. So let me introduce Emily. Emily, if you could just talk maybe a little bit about your role as green coffee manager and what that entails with Peet.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. Thanks for the invitation again. I was able to do a tasting for the Women's Wellness virtually this year, and that was really great. We had a nice group, so I'm really happy to be presenting with John and to a larger group. I know all of our alumni weekends have taken us virtual. I was able to do it with my alma mater. Don't worry, I'm not a Stanford alma mater. I went to school on the East Coast at a very small liberal arts school. So yeah, I'm the green coffee manager, and I'm part of the Peet's coffee department. And I remember when I first started at Peet, someone was like, isn't the whole company the coffee department? And that's true in some cases. So, but to be more descriptive and to be more accurate, I'm part of the green coffee purchasing and quality control department. So all of the green coffee that John mentioned that gets imported to the US that we roast in Alameda, that all gets quality approved by myself, and we have 4 other cuppers. Cupping is the term for the quality approval of coffee. So we get the green coffee, we roast it in these small sample roasters, and then we put a 5 cups out per. It's usually it's 5 cups per purchase quantity, which is usually a container of coffee. A container of coffee is about 275 to 300 bags of green coffee, and that can weigh about 40,000 pounds. So we're, despite only cupping 1 sample per container of coffee, we still have to cup a lot of coffee because Peet's buys a lot of coffee. All different origins around the world, all your major producers, Central America, South America, Brazil and Colombia, East Africa, the Indo-Pacific, Yemen, you name it. So we're busy on a yearly basis. We always have coffee either coming in or being approved to ship from origin. And we make a joke that as soon as Holiday Blends stops roasting, that's when we start on it again for the following year, because for the lead times of some of these coffees and just, kind of taking a few weeks or months to get an idea of what we want this blend to be, we start in January and February, and we had this blend buttoned up before we had our shelter in place for COVID, which was mid-March. So this blend was already raring to go, at least on paper, by March, and even though we're just seeing it now. So that's just a little bit of background about what I do at Peet's.
Okay, so Holiday dates back to at least the year 2000. We were talking earlier, probably way before that, our archives that we could find when you go back that long, but it's a little bit different every year. This year's blend is 4 different components of Guatemala, 2 Ethiopian beans, and 1 from Sumatra. So to get to those 4, Emily, how many did you actually taste?
Well, first we kind of start throwing ideas out about how we want to. I would say in general, there's always a component from either Sumatra or the Indo-Pacific. So that's kind of like, that's one part of the formula. We almost always have like a washed Central American coffee. So that's 2. And then 3, we almost always have a some sort of East African component. So we going into each year, we have a framework for 3 different components. We build, Holiday Blend is a world blend, so that's why the 3 major coffee growing regions are showcased in that blend. And then what we do is we start talking about what coffees have been really great this year? What origins have surprised us? Which origins would work well together? The Sumatra component, we've been using a quality of Sumatra called Lintong Mutu Batak for the past few years, only because it's been such a phenomenal wet hold Sumatran, earthy, herbal, really aromatic, but also bright. It has a decent amount of acidity. It's so complex. And that's kind of been the backbone for our holiday blend for these past few years, this Mutu Batak. I'm not sure if we talk about it specifically in the in what's shown online, but it's consistently been one of the best coffees we cup over the course of the year. Guatemala is usually a great pairing with an earthy, dense Sumatra, because it's also chocolatey. It has some flavors that are compatible with Sumatra, but it also can have a really nice, clean acidity. And then for an African component, we have great coffees that we can choose from every year, from Ethiopia or Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi. This year, we decided to do a washed Ethiopian coffee from co-ops that we work with in the Jimma region. And then we also sourced some really great natural Ethiopian coffees for the other half of the Ethiopian component. They're in the blend at equal percentages. And if you know Peet's, and especially if you're aware of Ethiopian Supernatural, the Ethiopian component that goes into this year's holiday blend is very similar aromatically and in terms of acidity to that Supernatural component. So if you're tasting this coffee or you're smelling this coffee and you're getting like berry, blueberry, if you're smelling or tasting these fruity notes, that's from that Ethiopian component. And then as it cools for me, as I'm tasting it now, that Sumatra, that herbally Lintong note, that's really in the back half, it's really coming through that Sumatra component that kind of gives us that seasonal, that spice and that weight and that just like warm, cozy blanket feeling. That's how
I'm going to start brewing here, but maybe while I'm doing that, you can talk about the difference between the natural and the washed Ethiopians and just what that means in those two different methods.
Yeah, sure. So in one of the pictures that you put up with the different ripeness, if you guys remember seeing that, the last cherry was almost like black. It was, it was green, underripe, and then partially ripe yellow, and then a red ripe cherry. That last picture that was on the progression was it was overripe, but it had started to dry, and you could kind of see that the cherry was kind of dark and was like brownish. A naturally processed coffee is when a cherry is picked off of the coffee tree and it is dried with that cherry on it, and it shrivels. It kind of looks kind of like a raisin. And then after that cherry has dried on the bean, that's when it's processed. That's when the cherry itself is taken off. There's a parchment layer, and then it dries a little bit further after the cherry has been taken off. So that's a natural process. And a wash process is a similar process, but after the cherry is picked, that the fruit, the coffee cherry fruit, is removed immediately, and then it's washed, like literally washed, put in like through water channels, and it's fermented. On the outside of a coffee bean, there's a parchment, and then there's a mucilage or a honey. The sugars in those honey, that is what is actually fermented, and that's part of the processing of a washed coffee.
Okay, I've got my coffee brewing here. So Let's talk a little bit about how to brew coffee. I have some equipment here, not a lot. Today there's a lot of different ways to brew coffee. There's no right way or wrong way necessarily. It's a matter of taste. I like to use press pots. I use this every morning here at home now that I'm, like many of us, working from home. I've started incorporating a scale to get a more accurate day-to-day brew. So I actually weigh out my coffee instead of dumping it in a measuring cup. And I've actually liked this quite a bit. The ratio of coffee to water is on every bag of Peet's. There's probably a lot of information online about the ideal way to do it. For the large press pot, I've kind of settled on, through a little trial and error, 99 grams of coffee, easy to remember. If I do 98 or 100, it's not gonna, I can't taste the difference. Maybe some very discerning palates can, but it all, anywhere right, pretty close to that range works well for me. I am missing one piece of equipment here. Anyone know what I'm missing or don't have? No, I'll tell you, a grinder. Don't have a grinder. This is pre-ground coffee. Anybody know why I don't have a grinder? Because I'm lazy, that's why. I like ground coffee. So ideally you would be grinding your coffee right before you use it. It is an extra step. It is a little bit messy. It does make noise at 6 in the morning. So everybody has to come to their own conclusion. What's the optimal way for them? I go through coffee pretty quick. I'm not buying 10 pounds at a time. I'm buying, half pound to a pound a week from a Peet's coffee bar where it's really fresh. So to me, that's fine. Other people wouldn't think of doing anything else than fresh ground coffee right before they brew it. So you have to decide what's best for you. I do like to think of coffee though, think of it kind of like as ground pepper. You would, at a fine restaurant or in your home, you wouldn't buy a big tub of ground pepper and let it sit in your cabinet for a year and then use it. You grind it fresh onto your salad. So you can think of it that way. That being said, this was pre-ground, but for my palate, it's just fine. So then we measure it out into our press pot. We get our boiling water and our electric kettle, pour that in. You may have noticed that I did it fairly carefully. I didn't just dump it down the middle, so it tunneled right through the coffee and left half the grounds dry. I tried to be careful about saturating all the coffee. And once that's done, I set my timer for 4 minutes. Often when I'm working, I'll do 3 because by the time I tell Alexa to set 3 minutes and then get from my desk back to the coffee after the 3 minutes have gone up, it's really closer to 4 anyway, but 4 is the recommended time. Again, could I tell the difference between 3:45 and 4 and 4:15? Probably not. Some of you maybe could. Our timer just went off. So we're going to take our press pot, get the spout lined up here, give it a little partial, raise it back up, which makes it a little easier to press down, and give it a good press. And for those of you that haven't used a press pot before, there's a screen, a very fine mesh screen in here that's pressing all the grounds to the bottom and leaving the coffee on top. This will, especially at the bottom of the press pot, there will be a little sediment, which I don't mind. Some people want a cleaner cup, and for that you may want to use a pour over filter or another method or an automatic drip. So again, no right answer. I think this produces a really nice, rich cup of coffee. So when we do tastings in our office, we use press pots. So this is kind of the Peet's recommended method. But again, your mileage may vary. Emily, I think you have a press pot there in your home right now. Yep.
Yes.
There up. See a press pot in the screen there?
Yeah, we have a Chemex at home as well, but especially for holiday blend, it's just because of the weight and the complexity of it. I kind of don't. I for this particular one, I don't really prefer like a paper filtered coffee for this blend. But if you have a Chemex, there's a great metal filter called a cone filter, K-O-N-E. So, and that kind of winds up being like a hybrid between you're doing a pour over method, but you're using a metal screen. So that's also another option if you're looking for a hybrid pour over press pot.
Another thing that's important is how to grind the coffee. Since I get it ground at the Peet's coffee bar, I'm assured of a good grind, but I don't know how well this will show up on camera, but here's the press pot grind. Let's get that up there. And it's a pretty coarse grind. I don't know if you can really tell. You can almost feel it with your fingers better than you can see it. But we don't want too fine a grind on press pot because it would clog the filter, and you don't really need it to be that fine because the coffee is mingling with the water. If you were to use this press pot grind in your pour over, what would happen is it's too coarse. The water would run right through the grounds into your cup without sitting there like it does now a little bit before it goes through, and you'd end up with a really weak cup of coffee. So it is important to get your coffee ground correctly for the method that you're using. So now we have our coffee, and we can actually move on to tasting. So I have my tasters here. We'll pour a
We also
few.
have some questions.
Oh,
in the chat, yeah.
excuse me.
Caroline can ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
For 1-speed grinders, how long would you recommend grinding for pour overs?
1-speed grinders. You know, it's been so long since I've used Sharon, who was somebody in our coffee department a long time ago, a terrific and knowledgeable employee, used to call those whizzy grinders. Blade kind of circulates around and chops the beans. So for pour over, do you know, Emily, offhand what it might depend on the grinder. I'm sorry, I don't have a specific answer for you.
Yeah, I mean, a pour over, you want it, if a press pot, you want very coarse, you want like a coarse salt. For a pour over, you want something a little bit more fine than that, not like super fine, like not super fine sugar. That would kind of be more like an espresso grind. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of like grind size. So as long as you get it a little bit more, as long as it's not as coarse as like a coarse, like kosher salt, if it's a little bit more fine than that, you
I
should.
think the time depends on your grinder, and you have to just play around a little bit with it to get the consistency you want.
Next question.
Oh, Nikki wants to know if you're going to bring the scale to 4th week.
Yes, I am going to. If we hopefully have a 4th week this next summer and we're allowed to have coffee, I will be bringing my scale. So count on that. I'm not going back to once you go to a scale, you cannot go back to measuring cups. It's true for baking as well.
And then another question, what changes in growing/taste are you seeing with climate change, and what do you expect to see going forward?
That's a great question, and Emily, I'm going to throw that to you.
Yeah, no, that is a great question. That was the first thing I was gonna say. That's a great question. I was on the chat itself, so I had a little bit of warning. So I was wondering how best to describe this. Yeah, climate change is real, and it is affecting coffee. But what I will say is that one of our great nonprofit partners that we work with at Peet's is World Coffee Research, and World Coffee Research is doing a lot of work in testing research with coffee varieties. One of the most important things that they're doing is an F1 hybrid trial, and I was able to actually cup some of the first coffees from those trials. We cupped 60 coffees because what they do is they have to kind of whittle down which hybrids they can go forward with in the future. So the purpose of creating these F1 hybrids is to be able to supply coffee growing farmers in regions with coffees that can sustain, are resistant to some of the issues that coffee has, like leaf rust, so that they can adapt to changes in climate. Coffee grows, as you probably know, in the tropics. It's between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. The highest quality coffees grow at higher elevations, which means cooler. So low-grown coffee, where it's hotter, it's not as high quality. We want the coffee that's growing from really high, 2,000, 3,000 meters high, really high grown coffee. What happens is the climate is changing. The coffee is kind of growing, it's kind of being forced up the mountain, at least in terms of those higher qualities. As an agricultural crop, it's dealing with climate change as well. So there are a lot of people in the industry looking at the problem, doing research, providing solutions, and one of those solutions is developing robust hybrids that can withstand some of these changes that are happening in our environment.
Any other in the chat? Was that it?
I think that was it.
Okay. If there's any more questions, feel free to unmute your microphone or put it in the chat. We'll be happy to address that. While we're waiting for more questions, we can actually go ahead and, oh, we got somebody.
I can follow up. Yeah, it's Matt. I asked that question on climate change. When you said hybrid, do you mean, I'll turn the video. Do you mean, is there any GMO involvement with that?
No, it's not. No, there's no modification. They're not modifying the actual genetics of like the coffee plant itself. They're just crossing existing parentages of coffee to create new vigorous hybrids. So yeah, from a GMO perspective, there is no known GMO coffee. It's just not. It's not like corn or some of these other agricultural products. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, and Matt, you asked me privately about Jim Reynolds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just answer it in front of everyone. So Matt was asking if Jim Reynolds is still roasting. Jim is our roast master emeritus, so he's retired. But pre-COVID, he still comes into the cupping room, like in the green coffee buying team. He would come in once a week and he cups with us, and then one day a week he would go into the roasting plant. He's doing great. He's in his 80s, so unfortunately he's been sheltering in place at home and staying safe and trying to stay sane. He's very active and he misses being in the office, but he is definitely still part of the Peet's fabric, and he's still involved with us. So
let me ask you. So I had dinner with Jim and his wife
great.
years ago. My brother did work with him on the side, but was he the second roaster after Mr. Peet then? In terms of head roasters, he was. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What's amazing about the 50 plus years of Peet's is that started in 1966, and we're on our third roast master now. Mr. Peet being the first, Jim Reynolds being the second, and our current director of coffee, Doug Welsh, being the third. So the company, I started 14 years ago, and the company's just gotten so much bigger since then. But I was a customer before I started working there. I drink the product every day now, and it's remarkable how much more coffee we roast now. And to me, it's every bit as good. And I think a lot of that can be traced to the continuity in the coffee department, having only 3 people. It's like the Pittsburgh Steelers of having coaches. The very little turnover in terms of people at the helm of coffee buying and roasting.
We have a couple more questions also.
Okay, a couple more questions online on the chat.
Can you comment on decaf coffees? A little vague, but.
This holiday blend is available as a decaf, which is nice. Yeah, I mean, there's 2 main methods for decaffeinating, and we have coffees for both. Emily, if you want to go into that briefly.
Yeah, we have there's a holiday blend as you mentioned, and we have a decaf major, decaf house, and water processed Arabian mocha Java. We also have in grocery, we have an organic water process coffee. I'm live in Greenland, so I know it's green skew. I'm blanking as what it's called in the store.
Also, but if you just maybe briefly touch on the direct contact method versus the water processed method.
Oh yeah. So the main difference is that there's 2 different solvents used there's mainly 2 different solvents used to extract caffeine from coffee. One is water, just water. The other is it's methylene chloride. It has a very low boiling point, so it's all once it extracts the caffeine, it is boiled off, it's evaporated. All of our coffees come with a decaf certificate that shows that there is amount of solvent left, or it's a very small amounts. I could probably do a whole session on decaf coffee, but we are in the process. We haven't started widely communicating it, but we're in the process of converting all of our coffee to water process decaf. So if that's a consideration as well, there are some water process options currently, but there will be more in the future.
That's news to see, so everybody's finding on. But let's get to the last question, but I know we're at our allotted time here, so let me just real quickly talk about tasting now that we have coffee in our cups. So it's good that we've had this chat because we've allowed the coffee to cool down a little bit. If it's really super hot, it's hard to taste some of the notes. So a couple of things that I'm tasting for. First, I'm smelling the coffee, see what aroma I get from it. And then I'm noticing a couple of things when I taste it. One is the body of the coffee, and the best way that was described to me is, say, it's kind of mouthfeel, the difference in your mouth between, say, a whole milk and a skim milk, the way it kind of coats your tongue. That's the way I kind of think of it. This is striking me, and these holiday blends are usually a pretty full-bodied coffee. Again, one is not necessarily better than the other. It's a matter of taste. Then there's acidity, which is not how it's going to affect your digestion, but it's a palate acidity, kind of I think of it as a tanginess that you get. I feel it more in the back of my mouth, especially as the coffee cools. So you want to taste for that. Again, not right or wrong. Some coffees are smoother, some are more acidic. Different people prefer different kinds, so that's something to taste for. And then any kind of flavors that you pick up, be it fruit flavors or chocolate or other things. Again, for all of Peet's Coffee, we don't do flavored coffee, so anything you're picking up in that is totally part of the bean. Nothing is added. There are, of course, many flavored coffees on the market, but Peet's is not one of them. So those are the three things I get. I don't know if anybody with whatever coffee you're tasting here wants to mention what they're tasting. Emily, what are you getting out of this holiday blend?
Oh, it's someone else. I already talked a little bit about like some of the Ethiopian aromatics up front, and then kind of the syrupy Batak Sumatra body and herbal savoriness towards the end. It's also very smooth. There's kind of it's a dark roast, but it's not really edgy. It doesn't come across as a lot of roasted notes. It seems pretty well balanced.
Someone in the chat said that they fruity notes.
Fruity notes. Okay, could be like Emily was mentioning from the natural Ethiopian. So was there another question?
Yeah, there are a few more questions in the chat. Can you comment on using a stainless steel versus more traditional glass French press? Seems to give a cheap taste, perhaps similar to an old style percolator.
Yeah, I mean, if you're picking that up, that's pretty much your answer. I like using the glass. Of course, you know, the drawback is it is glass, and I've broken several of these in my time, but they do make replacement beakers. You don't have to buy a totally new unit, but nothing beats glass. Maybe if you're camping or going somewhere a little more rustic, I could see the stainless steel or plastic having some utility as far as not being as fragile.
Okay, and also someone wants to know, does Peet's have its own teas or any holiday teas this year?
We do have our own teas. They're all branded now as Mighty Leaf tea. There's no more Peet's tea, but Mighty Leaf tea is our tea. Some of our old varieties are under the Mighty Leaf name. And as far as the holidays go, I haven't seen if we're doing a winter solstice or other holiday. Emily, do you know offhand if there's?
I don't know offhand, but I can only assume there will be another winter solstice. And we have been producing winter solstice underneath the Mighty Leaf brand for a few years now. So.
Yeah, and that's a black tea with spices mixed in. It's really quite delicious. So you can go on Peet.com or look in a Peet's Coffee Bar for winter solstice tea. Might not quite be out yet, but hopefully available a little later in the year. Anything else in the chat?
Yeah. Which Peet's coffee do you recommend for a home espresso machine?
Home espresso machine. You want something espresso. We use Major Dickinson's and Arabian Mocha Java, I believe, in our coffee bars. Emily, you have a favorite for espresso?
I don't have a home espresso machine, so I only, in the coffee bars, it's the Espresso Forte. I will say Sean Conway, our CEO, does have a home espresso machine, so he loves trying different coffees. He's made Ethiopian Supernatural as an espresso. I haven't had it. That's probably pretty wild though. sometimes with the more acidic coffees, the espresso can kind of have them taste a little bit more acidic, and I don't think they necessarily go as well with milk. That's just my opinion if you're looking for a latte or something like that.
Yeah, try it. Give that a try. It's Indonesian coffee. I don't really drink espresso hardly ever. I just drink press pot black coffee. But Garuda is really a wonderful, rich, very smooth coffee, and I've heard from many people that it makes a great espresso. And it's not quite as well known as some of our other varieties. So I would recommend giving that a try if you haven't already.
Also, how does the quality of beans compare from like a Safeway to like in-store location?
We roast all of our coffee at the same location in our Alameda roasting plant, so it really should all be the same. The difference is going to be how old it is. So same quality, but there's a roast date on all the bags in the grocery store, so pay attention to that. It might be generally a little fresher at the Peet's Coffee Bar. They turn it over there pretty quickly. But depending on where you live, if you're here in the Bay Area, especially those coffees are being turned over in the grocery stores pretty quickly, maybe a little bit less so in other regions, although a maximum of 90 days, which for coffee on the shelf is pretty short shelf life. And we have our own team of drivers and trucks. We treat it pretty much like fresh bread. We don't rely on Safeway or other store personnel to rotate out the coffee. We have our own employees that go in there making sure you're getting fresh coffee in the stores. So, but pay attention to the roast dates because it's on every bag. And you can also order it at peets.com, and that's pretty much the freshest you can get. It's being roasted and shipped out within days. So you'll have it pretty much wherever you live in the country within 7 to 10 days tops, and usually sooner than that. And that's about as fresh as it gets. And also on peets.com, you can get roasts that we have a limited supply of. We don't have enough to go around to all of our grocery stores or coffee bars. This is a Panama coffee that was produced recently. And we have a Jamaica Blue Mountain coming up and some other reserve coffees that simply can't be produced in enough quantity to get out to the grocery market. But if you want to try unique, very, very fresh coffee, peets.com is a great source.
How long will coffee that you order online stay fresh? Should you keep it cool?
Storage of coffee, we recommend these bags that you get either at the grocery store or through our mail order. Mylar bags, they're flushed with nitrogen, which knocks all the air out and seals in the coffee. And it has the bags have a one-way valve on them to allow gas to escape so the bags don't burst, but no outside air to get in. They do a great job of storing the coffee until you open it. Then they don't do such a great job anymore. So once you open the bag, we recommend getting into an airtight canister, storing it in a cool, dark place like your pantry. Heat, light, moisture, those are the enemies of coffee. So those are the things you want to keep away. Longer term storage, freezer is good. What you want to avoid is taking it out of the freezer, back into the freezer, out of the freezer, back into the freezer. You can get condensation, moisture, no good for coffee. As far as how quickly you should use it, we recommend 90 days tops. You know, and we have customers that wouldn't think of using coffee older than a week or two. We have customers that can pull a bag out of the freezer months after it's roasted. To them, it tastes just fine. It's not milk, it's not meat, it's not going to hurt you. It's really just a matter of personal preference. That's it?
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? You can unmute yourself or throw it in the chat last minute.
I've got another question.
Yeah.
Let me ask you from the operations side, I don't know if this is your domain, Peet's stores, what is Peet's doing for the environment? Specifically things like compostable or recyclable cups, plastic spoons, all this stuff. I email Peet's from time to time about my experience in the stores. This is pre-pandemic. And I'm a longtime Peet's supporter and so forth, but I definitely think there's room for improvement there. I notice there is one competing coffee company that seems to be ahead of the curve in terms of environmental issues. But if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, I'm not involved in the retail department too much, but I can tell you I have seen over the years more recyclable and compostable components. You can always do a better job. It's always a balance of cost versus what's available. I know that K-Cups now are recyclable, which they didn't used to be, which is a great win. But yeah, my suggestion is keep writing, because the more they hear from people, they know the more that that's desired, and the more that that's important to you. So
Great.
absolutely, yeah, keep the letters and emails coming.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Please feel free to unmute your line.
You drink your coffee black.
Absolutely. Again, no right or wrong answers. I don't
He
shame.
lets me put milk in mine.
I don't shame people too much who put milk in their coffee and
Just a
sugar.
little
But
bit.
I do recommend, if you're doing a tasting or a comparative tasting, to try a little bit black. You know, a lot of people just don't drink it that way. Do what's right for you. But I'm not, I don't have an enormous sweet tooth, so for me, black coffee tastes the best. But that's again, personal preference.
Great, thanks. I drink mine black.
You're my man.
Well, I'm gonna come out, and even though I'm in the coffee department, I do sometimes add some milk to my coffee, especially if it's a dark roast in a press pot. I'm drinking this holiday blend black right now, and it's super sweet. And I do agree that some, if not most, coffees, at least from Peet's, don't need milk. But hey, I think it's totally the sugar for me is too sweet, but just to add a little bit of. I also kind of drink coffee a little bit kind of slowly if I have it black. So sometimes putting a little bit of milk in it helps me get just drink it a little bit faster for my caffeine needs. So
I just wanted to say thank you for this event. This is really fun. I'm a native Californian, but I live in Portland, Oregon, coffee country up here, but I'm always rooting for my Peets.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. We, as you've probably seen, we do have a few coffee bars up in the Portland area, and we also purchased a few years ago Stumptown. So
Yes.
Stumptown's part of the Peet's family as well.
Yes, yeah, they're great too, but I still go to Peet's.
Okay. Well, keep drinking. We'll roast more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question in the chat: does the house blend differ a lot from year to year or month to month?
House blend is a Latin American blend, fairly medium bodied. But Emily, you want to talk about how it might differ from time to time?
yeah, I mean, the blend itself does not change. It has the same components. But I think someone alluded to someone in the chat alluded to variances in Major Dickinson's. Basically, coffee is an agricultural product, and it's seasonal in nature. And every year there is a crop, and there's definitely, even though our supply chains are robust and consistent, there's from year to year, season to season, there are variations. So we try to roast, and we try to have the blends be the same, and to source the very similar qualities from year to year. Ultimately, there will be some variation, especially with, like, if you have a blend that has Sumatra, some year, it's like a lot, from container to container, some origins are very, very different. So if you're drinking your house blend and you're like, this tastes a little different from the last house blend that I had, it's maybe not in from the recipe, from the percentages. We don't really change that up, but there are variations from all of the different coffee regions we buy from.
Would be like, would vintage of the wine be a way to think about it?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Any last questions? All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. You can go to peets.com for more information, or go to lairofthebear.org for more information about the lair. We hope to be back with at least a modified version of camp next summer. And for those of you who are lair campers, I hope to see you guys up in Pinecrest in some fashion in 2021. So thanks a lot, and go Bears.
Go Bears. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Great program.
Go Bears.
Go
Go
Bears.
Pete's.
Thank you.
Thank you.